next 5 weeks. And we're going to talk about healing. As I have experienced the world, and as I have walked with other people who are walking through the world, it just seems to me that we have a lot of need for healing. That there are a lot of things that people are carrying, both personal things and then communal things, that are making us struggle. We're worried about the climate crisis, or the racial divisions and racism. And then there's things that all of us will encounter in our life, times of grief or times of disappointment, times where relationships are not what we would want them to be. And I've experienced this place, our church, and our faith as a place of healing. And so I think we'll think about that. What does God bring to those who are weary? Or as that old spiritual sings, the sin-sick soul. So there is a balm in Gilead. That's what we're talking about this month. And that spiritual, there is a balm in Gilead, refers to a passage from Jeremiah where the people have gone astray. They have gone so astray, their hearts are broken, and God's is broken as well. And Jeremiah the prophet is lamenting, is there not a balm in Gilead? And I wondered where that came from this week, and so I looked it up. Gilead was an area east of the Jordan River that was known for its healing balms. It produced those medicinal, restorative balms that brought peace. So it's like saying, well, come on, isn't there medicine down there at CVS that you can take that'll make you feel better, right? The prophet is saying, isn't there something here that can heal? It's a rhetorical question. Yes, yes, the Spirit of God brings life, brings restored life, brings new life. So that's our focus this morning. And our first story is from Jesus, because we remember wherever Jesus went, he brought healing. Healing to people's bodies, healing to communities that were deeply divided, healing to people's spirits. So he tells a story, as our kids seem to know pretty well, about a man who was himself an outsider, but who saw someone who was broken in both body and spirit and did not pass by, but became a healer. So thank you, Carolyn, for reading.
Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. A legal expert stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to gain eternal life?" Jesus replied, "What is written in the law? How do you interpret it?" He responded, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, with all your mind, and you are to love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But the legal expert wanted to prove that he was right, so he said to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He encountered thieves who stripped him naked, beat him up, and left him near death. Now it just so happened that a priest was also going down the same road. And when he saw the injured man, he crossed over to the other side of the road, and went on his way. Likewise, a Levite came by the spot, saw the injured man, and crossed over to the other side of the road and went on his way. A Samaritan who was on a journey came to where the man was. But when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. The Samaritan went to him, bandaged his wounds, tending them with oil and wine. Then he placed the wounded man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took 2 full days' worth of wages and gave them to the innkeeper. He said, "Take care of him, and when I return, I will pay you back for any additional costs." What do you think? Which one of these 3 was a neighbor to the man who encountered the thieves? Then the legal expert said, "The one who demonstrated mercy toward him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Let us pray. Gracious and merciful God, speak to us now through the words of my mouth and through the prayers of all of our hearts. O God, our strength and our Redeemer. So I had a week, both in my life as a pastor and just in my life as a person, where I found myself saying, boy, things just seem to be getting harder. Things just seem harder than they used to be. Have you ever said that before? The world just seems like it used to be simpler. Well, I said that to myself, and then I remembered I'd heard that before. Now, you all know I'm kind of a junkie of old TV shows. I don't know what's on right now, but I can tell you what was on in the 80s. And one of my favorite shows that I have watched 100 times is Cheers, right? Do you remember Cheers?
Yeah.
This is a very current sermon illustration here. Cheers was on in the 80s, and it was about the retired ex-baseball player Sam Malone. And he had to retire out of baseball because he was an alcoholic. And he got into recovery, but he still owned this bar. And so he kept this bar where all the friends met and everybody knows your name, right? Well, did you know in their first season, Cheers had really low ratings and it almost got canceled. And halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way through their first season, when the ratings were in the tank, and I guess they figured they had nothing to lose, they tackled an important subject. And so in this one episode that I thought of this week, Sam has an old baseball buddy. He was the catcher. Sam was the pitcher, right? Gosh, I love this show. He was the catcher, and he wrote an autobiography. And I almost showed you this clip, but it had 2 bad words in it. So I'm just going to tell you how it goes. He comes and he's going to do a press conference about this autobiography, but Sam doesn't read the book first. And the book, this guy's name is Tom. Tom wrote the book because he had to come out. He was a gay man, and he'd been closeted while he was playing professional baseball, and he couldn't live that way anymore. This is 1983 that this was on television. And so reporters ask them questions about it, and Sam learns about it in front of the TV cameras, and his first instinct is to distance himself from his old friend. But Diane, being Diane, pulls him aside and helps him think through what's going on. And Sam is, he's confused, he's angry, he's upset, but he doesn't really know how to feel, and he finds himself saying, the world was just a lot simpler back then. I was like, oh my gosh, I've been saying what Sam Malone is saying. And it occurred to me, this is 1983. And the world had already become too complicated for at least Sam Malone. And so I was wondering, when was that time when things were simpler? 1983 apparently wasn't it. When was the time when things were easy? When things were straightforward? When you knew what to do in every situation, you knew how to respond to people when you came up against a difficult situation. Made me think, maybe there wasn't a time when things were really simpler. So what does Sam do? Diane says to him, you know, Sam, he's still the same guy, and he's still your friend, and he needs you. So Sam goes out to the front of the bar. Tom's about to leave, but he calls him back, tells Coach to set him up at the bar, you know. And he goes up and invites him to stay. And Tom says, thank you, Sam. I really appreciate it. And Sam said, you didn't drop me when I had a drinking problem. And they put their arms around each other, and the reporters take a bunch of pictures. That's the first half of the show, and the second half is not as good. But you know, it seems like the world gets harder when you hear difficult information that you don't know how to process. And when you're in a tough spot, it's easy to look back and think, boy, it was a lot simpler then. But how does Sam deal with it? He puts his arm around his buddy who needs him. He shows support and presence, that he's not going to abandon him. And suddenly, things are simpler again, right? Now it's just two friends with their arms around each other, helping each other feel better. Neither one abandoned the other when they needed it. Maybe things are not as hard as we think. You know, in our Wednesday night Bible studies, both at UMW and in the evening, we are still reading Brian McLaren's book, We Make the Road by Walking. We started this the 1st of September, and we're nearing the end of our year. And in this season, Brian is walking us through the creation stories in Genesis. And remember, in the Garden of Eden, in the beginning, God places two trees there. Tells Adam and Eve, the first people, they can eat from anything in the garden, especially the tree of life. God places a tree called the tree of life in the garden. That would be a good tree to eat from, right? Then God says, just don't eat from this tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, they slip up. They eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. No one takes responsibility for their actions. They all blame it on somebody else. But now suddenly they're able to tell what's good and what's evil, what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. All my life I've wondered, isn't this a good thing? Don't we want to know what's good and bad? Don't we want to know right from wrong? Why is it so bad that we eat from this tree? And McLaren has really helped me understand this. He says when you eat from that tree, then your life becomes about making judgments. Is this good or is this bad? Is this right or is this wrong? Is this wise or is this evil? He says God didn't want us to be in the business of judgments. God wanted us to be in the business of life, of living. Adam and Eve eat and they're able to make judgments, and immediately they're ashamed. They're aware of the differences between them, and they hide. McLaren says the tree of the knowledge of good and evil takes neighbors who walked together with each other in the beautiful garden, takes neighbors and makes them rivals. And what happens when you have a rival? It's not too far before they become an enemy. The tree of life helps us live together and be alive. The tree of life is where we put our arms around one another in our times of need, and we go forward together. We have this parable today of the Good Samaritan. Now, in this parable, there are a lot of characters, and every character in this parable has had a feast at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Even the listener has had a feast of good and evil. We know what judgments to make. We know who the good guys are, and we know who the bad guys are. The good guys are the priest and the Levite. Those are the upstanding citizens, the ones who have all the training and all the expertise, the ones who run all the institutions. We know who the bad guys are, the robbers, and the Samaritan. The Samaritan, that is a band of people you just didn't want to be associated with. So we all know who's who in this story, except that Jesus doesn't tell it that way. In his story, everybody gets mixed up, and the good guys don't seem to be all that good. This man who is traveling gets beat up and he is left for dead. He is broken now in body and spirit. But the Samaritan, the one who knows what it's like to be abandoned, he doesn't leave him alone. He goes to him, and just like our kids were saying, he takes care of him in body and spirit. He heals his wounds and treats him with the medicinal balms. He takes him to a safe place where he can get good rest. He sets him up with good care, and he pays for it abundantly. 2 full days' wages. And he says, I'll pay you whatever else you need when I come back. He opens a tab and says he'll pay for it at the end. He promises to come and check up on the man. So, the tree of knowledge of good and evil does not serve us well in this story. We don't really need to know who's right and wrong and who's good and bad, what's good and what's evil. We just need to know that to be fully alive, you're supposed to put your arm around the person who's in trouble and care for them and walk with them. And that leads to life. We have to remember the question that the lawyer asked to Jesus to get him to tell this story. What was the question? The question is not what's good and what's bad. The question is, what should I do to inherit eternal life? What should I do to be fully alive? Jesus says, show mercy. Show mercy. Who's the one who's a neighbor? Who is the one who sees other people not as enemies or rivals, but as neighbors? The one who shows mercy. Ryan McLaren says over and over, the main theme of his book is that what we really want, what we as humans really want out of life, deep down in our bones, is to be alive, to be fully alive, to live as we are meant to live in love, to live with peace, to live in peace with one another. And how do we do that? Not by studying right from wrong, not by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but by eating from the tree of life. And how does Jesus say we do that? By showing mercy. By showing mercy. Friends, as a pastor, I'm privileged to sit with people and to hear their stories. And sometimes their stories are so heartbreaking. They're so heartbreaking. And I wish sometimes that everybody could hear these stories. Because if we could all hear the pain that some people are walking around with, we would just treat each other a lot more gently. We would know the wisdom of that centering thought, to be kind, because everybody is fighting a hard battle. Pastors aren't the only ones who hear it, right? Doctors and nurses, teachers, social workers. Pretty much anytime you work with the public, even if you don't work with the public, you're a person. And you probably know the pain that you carry, or the pain that your loved ones carry. To be human is to have some kind of burden. We all have that. There are a lot of people walking around, broken in body and spirit. And yet we go out into the world and we try to be like the good guys in the story of Good Samaritan. We try to be those people who have it all together, the ones who are upstanding and the ones who everyone can look to, the ones who look like we've got it all figured out because we've eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's not what we're called to do. Jesus doesn't want us to look like we have it all together, or to be concerned about making a judgment where we can be the good guys. Who is the hero of the story? The one who shows mercy. The one who shows mercy. I think we are here because mercy has been shown to us. Because we have been healed by somebody coming alongside us and putting their arms around us and saying, I won't abandon you. And that is our call as well. The way of mercy is healing. And the way of mercy is life. Thanks be to God.
Amen.